Hunting Trump, destroying America. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, the left has wanted to put Donald Trump in jail since 2015, and today Democrats have gotten them closer to that goal. And let's be very clear, the White House is the key player in this game of political vengeance. Now, sure, they're officially saying no comment when they're asked about Alvin Bragg's indictment of President Trump. But make no mistake tonight, Joe Biden bears the ultimate responsibility for what this will do to America. You know, our nation's chief executive has the inherent duty to do everything he or she can to preserve America's standing in the world as the world's leading democracy. Now, that means, whether through back channels or public speeches, Biden should have made it very clear that his party would oppose any local prosecutor who uses trumped-up criminal charges to punish and humiliate a former president. But of course, Biden didn't do this. Instead, once again, he bowed to the far left, which has been salivating over the prospect of Trump and a mugshot for years.
A lot of Democrats spouting off saying that they think Trump should go to jail.
President Trump himself could end up being prosecuted.
Once he becomes a civilian, Donald Trump may have to go to court and could possibly go to jail.
People who know Donald Trump's conduct have long said he belongs in jail.
He could go to jail for up to 4 years.
And tonight, many on the left are gloating. You've read them on social media. And they're not considering, though, what this is going to do to our country. Tens of millions of Americans, maybe half the country, will come away from this sad saga with less faith in our justice system. They're going to believe that if you hold one set of political views, you'll be targeted. But if you hold another set of political views, you'll be protected. Americans will start believing that the principle of equal justice under the law is frankly a joke, because they're going to see the justice system as rigged. An America where prosecutors who wield enormous power are just political hacks? Alvin Bragg is no different from many of the hosts, for instance, on MSNBC. For them, it's get Trump or go home. We all know that if Trump had quietly retired from politics after the last election, he wouldn't be facing an indictment tonight. He wouldn't be facing any investigation in Georgia or by a special prosecutor in D.C. either. Going forward, when any American president or diplomat speaks out against, let's say, the human and civil rights abuses in Russia or China, well, those countries are just going to respond with, "You're lecturing us? Nice try, but your system is morally bankrupt. You did everything you could to put one of your own former presidents in prison right before one of your so-called elections." Well, and at that point, given what's happened, who could argue with that? The fact is, Democrats are doing what we've watched tin pot dictatorships and banana republics do throughout history. They made a political decision to try to put their chief political nemesis in jail. And they're indicting him in a state where it's highly unlikely he'll ever get a fair trial. Now, their case was such a loser that the Department of Justice declined to take it, and the Federal Election Commission didn't pursue it either. But now, on the cusp of what will be a fascinating, perhaps competitive GOP primary, 18 months before the presidential election, suddenly this case is a priority on a state level? Interesting timing. This is a shameful day in the history of the country. This is going to poison our political landscape for years to come. And the entire episode makes Biden out to be a total liar. So tonight, those self-proclaimed defenders of democracy, they've been proven themselves beyond any reasonable doubt to be total frauds. In fact, they've proven themselves to be the ultimate election meddlers. Pursuing a specious criminal case against former President Trump for one reason and one reason only, because they're worried that he might win again. Now, when Biden claimed that he was very concerned about losing democracy in the United States and that he was going to protect it after the 2020 election, he was lying. All along, he knew that the Democrat machine would do everything in its power, shady or not, to keep a populist conservative like Trump away from the levers of power. After Biden was elected, remember how he said he told all the world leaders that America is back? People thought this meant that he was going to bring the country together. But that wasn't ever what he was intending. Instead, he listened to the fringe, the far left who thinks Biden's problem is that he's too nice. They needed to pivot to being an administration of rage, where political opponents aren't just rivals, they're enemies. Enemies to be punished by any means necessary. Now, Biden could have made it clear to Merrick Garland that they should be fair to Republicans at the Justice Department. He could have insisted that the DOJ enforce the laws against protesting at the homes of Supreme Court justices. He could have spoken out against anti-Christian hate and violence. We've seen it against churches and pro-life centers. And he could have said that if Trump decides to run in 2024, I'll beat him the old-fashioned way. I'll beat him on the issues, because America doesn't jail political opponents. Go back and read Lincoln's second inaugural address. Now, in the midst of an actual bloody civil war. Now, after that, was his speech all about vengeance? Putting Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis in jail? Hell no. It was about how we as a nation needed to come together. It was about reconciliation. Now, no one is saying that we should ignore serious political crimes. But unless there's some bombshell here that's been kept secret all this time, this case is an embarrassment of nothing. No one thinks Trump committed a real crime here. But ironically, the people in New York who do commit real crimes, they get off scot-free, courtesy of the Democrat Party and Alvin Bragg. A healthy, vibrant democracy doesn't jail its political opponents. But the fact is, the Biden administration has been a complete and utter failure on every front. So they'd rather spend the next year and a half sowing division and hatred than selling solutions to all the problems that they created. They don't respect you. They think you're stupid. So they want to eliminate your options at the ballot box by getting rid of Trump. The ultimate in election tampering, isn't it? And they want you and the Angle so distracted by this bogus criminal case that we ignore the fact that the U.S. under Biden is spiraling down the drain. Here are just a sampling of some of the stories today that they don't want to talk about. After a transgender killed 6 at a Christian school, the White House said they were praying for the trans community, while Joe Biden said they are part of the fabric of America. And at the border, we just saw a group of 1,000 illegal immigrants rush across yesterday, as DHS Secretary Mayorkas claims he's unaware that the cartels use situations like that to distract border agents, to bring in guns, drugs, and criminals. You name it. They did it. We have a reeling economy on multiple fronts, inflation persistent, and the banks are floundering. And at China's direction, the world is quickly decoupling from the American dollar. The ramifications will be devastating for America if that continues. So Biden's approval on the economy, what is it, 32%? His overall approval, it's not that much better. Heck, only 25% of Democrats want him to run again. So his conception of democracy is that his family can make a fortune selling us out to China, and anyone who disagrees with them will be subject to the mob intimidation or jail time. As of today, tens of millions of our fellow Americans will never be able to see him as anything but a harsh, selfish partisan who only cares about keeping his grip on power. Every single Republican in office today and tonight should be speaking out against Bragg's Persecution Act. I don't care if you support Trump, you're running against Trump, 2024 or not. It's not really about him in the end. Tonight, the man who is set to be his chief rival in 2024 stepped up to the plate, Ron DeSantis, releasing this statement almost immediately, reading in part, "The weaponization of the legal system to advance a political agenda turns the rule of law on its head. It's un-American. Florida will not assist in the extradition request given the questionable circumstances at issue with this Soros-backed Manhattan prosecutor and its political agenda." Perfect. Bingo. What is happening here should be a warning to DeSantis or frankly anyone else who may get within striking distance of beating Biden. They should all realize that they'll become a target too. Some prosecutor somewhere will allege something. They fight dirty. These so-called champions of democracy. It's time for us to fight smart. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.